So there you go, there's the straight ahead 4/4 swing version, the little bossa outro from the Miles version, I think. So that's pretty self-explanatory. Let's try applying like a Brazilian bossa nova to it.
Speaking of bossa, maybe the intro?
Yeah, let's do a band intro.
Okay. 1, 2, 1.
So there you go. As a horn player, there's a few things that I'll approach differently playing in this sort of feel. Firstly, the melody. With the even eighth notes, and this kind of wasn't a super relaxed bossa, but it wasn't by any means aggressive. And there's just sort of a lighter, calmer approach, smoother maybe, that I would take to the melody instead of, you know, like we. And I'm sort of floating on top of the beat rather than really providing much rhythmic, shouldn't be like rhythmic unclarity exactly, but it's not as forceful, I suppose. And just more legato in general, I would say. And the same thing applies when we get into the solos. And I wasn't, again, playing super laid back in that particular instance, but you could play a lot more laid back than that. And Stan Getz's playing over ballads is a good example of that for sure. But how about the bass line?
bass line is pretty standard bossa nova bass line. So kind of halftime with some pickup notes. The kind of the usual way that you hear it, or maybe try to do it early on when you're playing, is just
Or silver bossa.
yeah. All the notes are very straight and kind of even, the same volume and the same intensity. The more traditional and authentic bossa is to accent the third beat of the bar, so more of.
1, 2, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1.
It's a little bit more driving, a little bit more rhythmically interesting to me. And the reason we do it that way, or you can do that way, is because we're mimicking a drum that's played. The kick drum and the bass are mimicking a hand percussion, actually mallet percussion, low-pitched drum, and that they mute the first beat and then accent the third beat. So it's just a little bit more authentic and a little bit more, I don't know, Brazilian. So you can pick either way to do it. I prefer that this way, but the other way is definitely fine too.
For the drums, there's a couple of iconic things that need to happen in a bossa. One of which is the bossa clave, which I'm sure all three of you are familiar with. It's either in a 3-2 or a 2-3 setup, and it sounds like this. Or this is the 2-3, 1, 2, 1, 2, 3. So there's that. You might have noticed that I was doing some non-standard things with my right hand on the surface of the snare drum. What I was doing was I was imitating the güiro, the fish. So on the head of the drum, I was doing a small circle. It sounds like this. And if you put it together, again with that bass line that Roger was talking about, you get a nice sound that honors the music tradition. You might have also noticed that although I was interacting with Thomas and Roger, there's a certain planing quality to this music, and the drums traditionally have more of a supportive, I don't want to say monotone because there's a lot of forward momentum there contrasting to the floaty quality of the melody, but it's a bit more subdued. Your interaction isn't going to be this sort of explosive that doesn't really fit in quite well in this subgenre as other types of music. So something to consider.
Yeah. One thing to remember with playing a bossa is that this is very guitar and voice-driven music, really. And so there is that relaxed quality, and when we're playing melodies, it's, I think, really helpful to reference some of the great bossa singers, João Gilberto and Astrid Gilberto, and the other Gilbertos.
Antonio Carlos
Jobim, obviously, but it's a very laid back and relaxed style of singing that's not projecting at all. It's, tall and tan. It's not tall and tan and young. That sounds dumb. It's very, very almost spoken. So you can sort of speak the melodies. It's not very supportive, which is not a way we want to play all the time, certainly. But it's very effective in this style.
Stan Getz is
the go-to instrumental reference, I'd say. Who else? Kenny Dorham, maybe. Chet Baker.
Yeah, but go to the roots.
Yeah.
Look up Antonio Carlos Jobim, Gilberto. just Google bossa nova, samba, Brazilian music, and you'll learn a lot that way.
Yeah.
Because that's what those other musicians were doing, is they
That's where
listened
they
to
got
the
it.
source, and their spin on it was the product that we all know pretty well in the jazz community.
Okay, so let's now change the time signature up, and we're going to do Autumn Leaves as a 3/4 waltz. And you'll see there's some compressing I have to do with the melody, but I'll talk about that after we play it. 1, 2, So there you go. You can hear that we've gone from 4/4 to 3/4, so I've had to remove a beat from each bar of the melody. So instead of now I've only got 3 beats, so I've got to go or I can go. You might want to do it if you're playing for dancers. To be really clear, but you know, in a jazz setting, we can be a bit more loose with it and go. So there's a few techniques we can use for compressing a melody. You can eliminate rests. So in this case, the pickups to the melody of Autumn Leaves are a quarter note rest and then 3 quarter notes. So you can just delete the rest and do it that way, or you can use some dotted quarter notes, dotted eighth notes, and some more rests. But it's
To compress the melody.
to compress the melody, yeah. And the same thing goes for when we're soloing, because a lot of us might have, you know, big vocabulary in 4, but then when we go to 3, suddenly, you know, all these licks that we've worked out so meticulously over 2 5s don't fit anymore. So you got to come up with new phrases. So practicing in 3 is definitely, you know, a pretty important thing to do, and 5 and 7 if you want to play in those time signatures. But there are certain things that lay easier than others.
On the bass for waltzes, you have to make kind of a conscious decision about which path you want to take. I think our tendency in America and American jazz is to, especially early on, is to highlight a lot of the dotted quarter note 2/3 feel, which is a very specific feel and vibe. I think it's easy to get have that become a crutch, and so because it's a waltz and it's in 3, and the thing that makes it special is the 3/4 feel, that it can be really good to start with a more of a waltz feel where you're highlighting the quarter notes, more of a quarter note. Yeah. Instead of a 2/3, and we can demonstrate that. Just 1, 2, 3, 1, 2. That was the 3/4. It's a very traditional 3/4 waltz. I'm going to accent more of the dotted quarter note approach. 1, 2, 3, 1, 2. So you hear that a lot in jazz, and it's an important subdivision and polyrhythm to use. But you just don't want to use it too much because it's a very certain kind of a flavor. So experiment with both of those, practice both ways, and be very conscious and deliberate about which you choose and when you choose to use them.
Obviously the one, like the 3/4 notes, makes it sound like a waltz. But if you only use that, then it can be a little corny and hokey and square. Yeah. But then if you overuse the dotted quarter, then it's almost no longer a waltz. So you've defeated the purpose of playing in 3. And this applies to chordal players, to guitar players and piano players in your comping rhythms, because you don't want to overuse one or the other, and you should pay attention to what the bass player and the drummer are doing. See what side of the spectrum they're kind of moving towards.
And then off of the dotted quarter note, 2/3 is the 4/3,
right,
which is another specific thing it's cool to throw in there, but you don't want to just start using it all the time
because if you only ever play in 4, even over 3 and 5, then kind of a one-trick pony. But it is something as a soloist as well to have in your back pocket if you want to play something, and if you're just hearing this line, but the only problem is you're playing in 3 and the line's in 4, then you just play 4/3.
You have to be careful as an accompanist when he's doing that. If I start playing all in dotted quarter notes, all of a sudden the feel is completely changed, and you're moving away from a waltz and you're moving into more of a 4/4 time. So just be very aware of those choices.
Yeah, and there's a balance to be struck here in terms of not being locked into whatever feel the tune you're playing is. You can go out from there, but you also don't want to leave it entirely to the point where every tune you play is just every feel at once, because that is kind of monotonous in its own way.
Right, yeah. One thing about bass lines for waltzes, it completely changes the math of writing bass lines. So it actually makes it a bit easier because you can really focus on beat 1, play a root, and then usually on either the beat on beat 1.5, I guess. Play some other chord tone, or on beat 3 play another chord tone or a leading tone. So it kind of simplifies things a bit, which is nice.
Right, you're not walking.
Right.
Yeah. How about for the drums?
Well, all 3 of you drummers have a good understanding of a waltz feel already. I would say that one thing to watch out for is placing snare drum on beat 1 of the 2nd measure. Because then you'll end up turning this into a really slow, stretched out 6/8 feel, or a 6/4 feel, I guess technically, but it changes the vibe completely. Can we play just the head, and I'll switch halfway through and you'll hear what that sounds like. 1, 2, 3, 1. So you can tell, it's a cool effect. It sounds cool and fun when you want it to sound like that. But if you're going for a more traditional 3/4 waltz, it's something to watch out for, because as soon as you hit snare drum on beat 1, our ears are so tuned into the 6/8 feel that it's going to pull us out of 3/4 land and bring us somewhere else, and that's dangerous if you don't want that to happen. Could we try this? You mentioned subtracting beats or contracting a melody to turn 4/4 into 3/4.
Yeah.
Could we do a similar feel, but instead of having 3 beats, we expand the 4/4 to cover 6 beats,
Absolutely.
so 2 3/4 measures, and maybe a little bit faster, like
Still as a waltz.
Still as a waltz, yeah.
1, 2,
So what were you doing as a melody player differently that time?
So we got a lot more space suddenly if we've added 2 beats instead of subtracting 1. And so it kind of unconsciously makes me anyway play a lot more modally for one thing, because you know, instead of 4 beats on C minor 7, I've got 6 beats, which is 50% more time. So I can really think more in terms of C minor 7 rather than 2, 5, 1, you know? The other thing is you've got more room also to play with the relationship between the chords as they're passing. So it doesn't have to be, it could be, that was actually 3, wasn't it? 6. But anyway, you can insert a few more passing tones in the space between those 2 chords, just because you have more room, basically. Rhythmically, you can play more connected phrases. You can also take more, you can create more space as well. Again, because you have the space to spare.
I found that rhythmically too, it opened up a lot more. I felt like I could fill more space and time, probably because there was less melody going on. And also actually do more polyrhythms and different subdivisions more freely, just because you're not having to, as a bass player, not having to mark that root every 3 beats, instead it's every 6 beats, so you have more room to play with.
Yeah.
I was doing pretty much the same thing with Roger's considerations taken into consideration.
So Christian, you ended playing sort of like an afro-cuban kind of feel. Can we talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, you know, it might even be better just to play the head once with an afro-cuban.
Sure, yeah.
We'll be feeling this in like a 12/8 feel here to help keep us oriented. I'll just take a couple measures. So, Afro-Cuban music, it's a whole another rich tradition, just like jazz music. For everybody, especially for drummers, go to Google or YouTube, hopefully and YouTube, and type in Afro-Cuban music and learn about it and listen to the authentic stuff, listen to the different instruments and have a basic understanding of the different types of instruments, specifically percussion instruments, that are part of that musical tradition, and learn what some of their idiomatic patterns are. For example, this bell pattern that I was playing is straight from the tradition. Of course, I was varying it, but that was my home base, and that rhythm is iconic in Afro-Cuban music, as were other rhythms that I was doing, rhythms that Roger was playing on the bass, rhythms that Thomas was alluding to with his melodies. It's good to be familiar with these melodies, just like you're familiar with jazz vocabulary. And the only way that that's going to happen is by exploring it through listening and by studying.
Yeah, like you said, tradition. There are very specific techniques and rhythms that are involved in Afro-Cuban music. And sorry if you already mentioned this, but what you're doing in the drum kit is putting together a big group of people who are all playing separate percussion instruments onto a trap kit, onto one drum set. And so this bell pattern could be from a cowbell or from a timbale player playing a ride cymbal. The kick drum might be a big bass drum with a mallet. There's congas, there's bongos, there's all sorts of things going on. Your job as a drummer is to put that all together, and so you need to learn the tradition and the actual rhythms that are going on to be authentic, which is really important.
Yeah, great point.
The cool thing about 6/8 Afro-Cuban is that there's polyrhythms built into it that make it such a cool, driving, danceable kind of a thing. So that you can count in 3 or 6 or 4 all at the same time within this music. Can you demonstrate that? Or maybe just play and
Yeah.
try to count it?
Yeah, I'll play with these so that you can talk over
Sure.
it.
Starts 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 1, 2, 3, 4. So both are going on at the exact same time, and they're both kind of inside of the rhythm that is going on. And so that gives a lot of really cool options for soloists, for bass players, for anybody in this music you can kind of dip your toe into whichever feel you want, and it's still going to sound really, really cool.
Yeah, and as a soloist, again, you just got a lot of rhythms to choose from. Sort of, I could have played the melody very straight. I could have gone.
Yeah.
Or I can add more triplets. So that gives you a lot of freedom in some ways, but as opposed to playing a bossa nova, you've kind of got almost more responsibility to line up with one of these rhythms. So you might have more choices, but you really need to follow them and be really clear with what rhythm you're playing.
Everybody always has responsibility for the time. However, in this music, especially, you have to be more in the center of the beat.
Yeah.
And more anchored to your own pulse, I guess, and these multiple subdivisions that are happening, because it's so rhythmically dense that if you are not responsible and on top of your time, it's going to sound like mush in no time.
Exactly, yeah. You can't be nebulous because there's just too much going on. Whereas with a bossa, you can sort of float. This might sound like you're floating, but really you're very locked in. The other thing I would say is I'm gravitating towards different aspects of the harmony. Like if I'm playing this in a swing feel, I'm really just thinking 2-5-1, 2-5-1, and it's a lot of melodic minor and Dorian and very bebop. Whereas in this feel, for some reason I just get drawn more to like harmonic minor. And that's just another aspect of it.
Yeah, just a flavor choice.
Yeah, yeah, totally.
Another feel?
Should we do one more feel?
Ballad?
Yeah, ballad. Maybe start rubato,
Mm-hmm.
and then come into time at some point, and we can talk about afterwards
Yeah,
how
Yeah.
we did that.
if we can find the time. So we made it into time there in the bridge, and that was really just mainly Christian setting it up, and in a really confident and clear way, without being obvious as well, I guess, because it didn't sound like, okay, and here's the time. It was more.
A one, a two, a 1, 2, 3.
Yeah.
Could we just talk? I think that the heart of playing in this sort of music, specifically in what we were doing, is transitions, and I think that it would help if the three of us talked about ways that we can communicate going into and coming out of time, or maybe just going into time on our specific instruments.
Yeah.
To help. This is good for starts of songs, ends of songs, wanting to stretch something. This is just all around good practice. But here are some measurable things that we each do to communicate time that you can do in your practice to be better communicators on the bandstand.
The first thing I would think about is just like physical communication. Just stance. You can do a little bob for 1, 2, just even 2 pickup notes. Everyone knows that's the time now, right? The other thing, again with pickups, is if you play a few notes leading into the next section or whatever it is you want to be in time, just a few pickup notes that are very clearly, just that can really make it clear that you're going into time. And note choices as well. When we were playing more freely with not as clear of a sense of time going by, I was you can sort of communicate that as well with your note choices and be more chromatic and a little bit less not necessarily landing on that really important melody note on a clear downbeat, but so those would be the sort of the 2 things I would.
And as bandmates, knowing the tune, knowing the chord changes, being able to hear those little clues that he leaves behind to just know where he is in the tune is important. There was a moment in that where Thomas held
Yeah.
and hung out for a while, and then I had to make a choice. It's like, well, I could wait for him to be proactive, or for him to take it, or I could be proactive and say, okay, well, here's where we're going. And that's a constant exchange that's going on in any band that's improvised, where we're listening and we're really hyper aware of everything that's going on with the other players, so that when we hear those little hooks and those little hints that they leave, I can be there with them, or know that they're kind of signaling to say, okay, where do you guys want to go with this? It's here. Why don't you give us something?
Right. Because especially with this melody, I mean, it's like pretty clear downbeats. So if you get away from that just momentarily, it can be a nice change of pace to not always have that, those melody notes that we know so well being downbeats, because then you kind of got, it's like a mush of a bar and then another mush of a bar, where you still have time. It's just kind of unsatisfying.
Yeah.
It's more like fermatas,
Right. Yeah.
than playing freely.
Yeah. And as far as signals, I mean, as a bass player, it can be it can be the most obvious thing of like, you can just play 4 notes in time and then you're in time. And I could take over like that if I wanted to. Generally, I'd say I usually wait for the melody to make the melody player, the lead player, to make some kind of an indication about where he wants to go with it, unless something else happens. If all of a sudden there's a space and I can sense that they're expecting me to take it, then I'll take it. Or if Christian does what he just did, which was signal, okay, 1, 2, it was very, very easy and flowing and fluid from section to section, but he made some good, solid and confident indicators of where the time should be, and so we just knew exactly where to be. So you have to be confident, you have to be aware, but also willing to, to reach consensus with the other people.
Yeah, so when you're setting the time, it helps to lead people to the time. You can't just all of a sudden downbeat and magically be together unless you're all robots and you've got the tempo programmed into your hard drive. So in that playing example that we just did, I started playing time about a bar beforehand to lead these other 2 guys into time and to establish the time. That's something that's important to do. If Thomas were doing it, he'd be doing it with pickup notes, or he'd be playing an obvious rhythm and give us boom, downbeat. Or Roger too, he looks up and be-da-da, boom. We can sense where the time is happening.
But I might play an out-of-time pickup and then cue a downbeat, but then I better hope that these guys are on the same page as me with the time, or I'll just downbeat and leave it up to them.
So that does happen sometimes. Yeah. Can we try that just real quick? I know we're running out of time, but so do something rubato, hit us with a downbeat, and we have to figure out where the tempo is. It's going to be different from what we just played.
Yeah, so there was we got there eventually, but that was not super clear.
So if that does happen, that's typically if the melody player is going to pull that card, usually they also accept the responsibility of bobbing where the next couple of beats are, and rhythm section members will wait until beat 3 to give a defined thing. So Thomas might go, and we know through his motion that this is where the time is, and we can visually pick up on that and translate it into our instruments. One more word about the free playing for drummers. Because we don't have the tools of melody and harmony on our instrument, we have non-pitched sounds that we're creating. The rubato playing can just sound like a bunch of randomness. So I'd like to challenge you to think about the melody and the harmony in phrases, and to have your playing through your speed, through the texture, through the timbre, through the different sounds that you create to reflect the shape of the phrasing that you're hearing and complement and contrast, support the group that way. That goes for everyone, but
Yeah,
a
absolutely.
good challenge for drummers to think about phrases, because we can't communicate unless you're Terry Bozzio with a different tom for every note, or Ari Honig who can play melodies on his drums.
Yeah. There's one final thing about playing more rubato or free is that for a melody player, our responsibility is slightly doubled and also lessened at the same time. And we're the only ones playing the melody per se. So we need to be clear with that. But we also have a lot. We don't need to play necessarily as much because Roger's got more freedom to play more notes, and not necessarily just roots and fifths all the time, but more interactive stuff.
Yeah, because rubato, where you're just playing, just
Again, fermatas.
yeah, exactly, it's a fermata.
Yeah.
It's super boring. There's all this space and stuff and room for true improvisation. So use it. Use that opportunity.
Yeah, should probably wrap this up.
Yeah.
But,
Good luck practicing. We
Yeah.
hope that this was helpful
Yes.
and informative, and
We hope to see you on a non-snowy Monday.
Yeah.